What's up folks, welcome to Wasted Space, and today I want to talk to you a bit about a game called JCB Pioneer, which is a sci-fi survival and construction title by Atomicom due to hit early access in September. The game is set at an indeterminate time in the future, but when that thing that we all know is going to happen has happened, aka the world is ailing, Earth is dying, we're running out of resources, and so time has come to colonize Mars. And for whatever reason, JCB, who you might have noticed slightly weirdly stuck on the front of the name earlier, owns the rights to mine and colonize Mars. Now, JCB is a construction machinery company, a bit like Caterpillar in the US, build heavy moving equipment, heavy lifting equipment, that sort of idea. And in what is a bit of an unfortunate cliche by this point, I think, the game begins with you crashing on the surface of the planet in a failed landing attempt, very much a la The Martian. And your mission initially, and in the demo that we got to play, was just to survive. So initially you've got to worry about oxygen, you've got to go and find a forward base that's been set up for you. Again, it's got a lot of ties to The Martian. And this isn't a bad thing, because in reality, both have been based off similar NASA documentation talking about how this whole process would work, or at least how we currently envisage it working. So step one is to get to a forward base and get oxygen up and running, and slowly, as you guys can probably imagine, you're going to be expanding from there, with the overall goal of firstly becoming self-sustaining yourself, so with oxygen and water and power, and all of this is going to require going out and using machinery made by JCB in the future, apparently, to go and help you do these various tasks. But then as the game progresses, things start to move more over to a sort of almost management strategic idea where you're trying to build up to the point where you're helping to colonize Mars while also supporting Earth with materials and minerals and that sort of idea. Which, as an overall premise for the game, seems fine. Not massively exciting and new, but the devil ends up being in the details for this sort of thing. So let's talk about those a little bit. The main gameplay arc of this is, of course, like most of these survival games, going to be chasing materials. Chasing a upgrade path that means that you're steadily getting more efficient at what you're doing, while hopefully also unlocking new cool things that you can do in the future, stuff that might require new vehicles or new buildings, or something that just sort of generally gives you that progression. Which is kind of fine, especially against this backdrop of sort of Earth is needing support and pushing you to colonize as well. So there will be a driving force kind of giving you some direction, giving you goals to work for that aren't just, well, I want to make this but better. And a lot of that's going to come in what seems to be two forms. You've got the vehicles that you're going to be progressing through and upgrading. They actually have a tech tree for them, which I hadn't had a chance to see in the demo we played, but was in some of the footage that I got sent, that shows that clearly you're going to be able to take that original one that you started off with in the demo, and I mean, we can see one with a mining attachment on the back of it, but there's clearly a lot more scope than that. You know, this tree had a bunch of different paths, maybe exclusive paths, I can't tell yet. That's always cool when you've got the sort of choice between, do I optimize this way or that way, rather than just being able to go, well, I want everything. And then this then clearly leads on to being able to get bigger, more powerful vehicles. Perhaps they've got more options for how you customize them, or more tools. We didn't obviously get given that stuff to play with. We got to see some slides with what looked like at least what they had planned for early access to be added into the game, and there was 6-7 different vehicles there, which if you add on top of the customization should give tons of options to mess around. And the same could also be said to apply to the suit the character's wearing as well. I always like it when the suit and sort of bits that the character's wearing reflects the HUD information. So this has got sort of stuff like your oxygen levels, your power levels and so on visible on the back of the suit as well. But that one suit you start with isn't going to be the only suit you ever have. It looks like as you progress through, different suits are going to be required to enter more hazardous terrain, and hazards are going to be kind of a big part of what you're playing against in this whole thing. And then the second area in which you're going to be progressing is, of course, your base itself, which is intriguing because it looks like it's being built and managed in much more of an RTS view. So as you can kind of see, it's all done with top-down kind of prefabs, which to some extent is a bit of a shame. I always love being able to sort of customize and build my own buildings themselves rather than just to sort of plop down. All you're really doing is creating the order in which the buildings go in. But it was a really unexpected approach to see it in that sort of top-down view, and maybe that means that actually you're going to be managing far larger bases than I would have initially expected. Certainly with that sort of view, it tends to lean itself towards much larger scale management because it makes it easier than having to run around on foot the whole time. Certainly there was a decent variety of buildings in the game so far, and they looked really cool when we did actually get a chance to get up close to them. In fact, to be honest, the whole environment looked pretty cool. I did like that rendition of Mars, and despite having been on it in EFM for God knows how long recently, still quite enjoyed hanging around there. Loved the hazards approach. So a lot of the threat you're placed under comes from hazards in the environment, things like dust storms and corrosive areas or meteor swarms. Stuff that looked really cool in game, and if done right can really give a sort of sense of you versus the environment, you versus the world. Certainly in the trailer you get glimpses of massive walls of dust going across, which I imagine are probably a bit fake. As I remember it, the atmosphere on Mars is too thin for that to actually be a problem, but it looks cool and there's a gameplay element. Hell, I'm down for that. In fact, returning to what I mentioned at the start about NASA plans and sort of how this is actually based on some, well, loosely based on some real science, the game is actually set in the southern hemisphere of Mars, which is an area apparently that we don't show that much interest in general. Not very many of the missions and so on have been to that area, and that's primarily because it's been decided that that hemisphere is too tough, it's too rocky, there's none of these sort of massive open deserts that are easy to traverse. It's far more of a harsh environment, and that kind of intrigues me. I mean, I like the idea when there is a sort of real life tie-in. Obviously I asked about exploration because with a map like that available, that's surely going to be one of the primary driving forces. And while I didn't get a straight up answer on this one because, yeah, early access, you don't say too much in advance, unless you want to pull a No Man's Sky. But yeah, we're talking about actually potential of finding past missions to Mars. Not past missions as far as in the sci-fi universe, but Mars is actually littered with all sorts of rovers and satellites and stuff we've thrown at it over the years, and that is the sort of thing that you might find when you're out and about. On top of, potentially, stuff that is a bit more made up, of course. It was definitely an idea of, science is important, let's base it on something real if we can, but let's not let that get in the way of a fun experience. Now, speaking of a fun experience, there were two things that you might notice I haven't mentioned in this video so far. One of them is combat. So guns and fighting and so on, which is kind of a bit of a weird omission, but that's because so far at least there hasn't been anything official said about their existence in the game. But if you were paying attention during the demo and went through the blueprints menu of the things you can produce in the producer thing, there were guns in there. So I can make a decent assumption that somewhere down the line combat is going to be a thing. God knows against what. That could go a bit cheesy and horrible if done not right, but it could also advance sort of some of the gameplay sides of things if what there is already doesn't sort of have enough to it to really pull through. The other one I didn't mention, and this is the really big one, is multiplayer. And in my opinion, multiplayer in particular construction games is really important because it's one of the ways in which you can share your experiences. That's what you want to do, right? You've made yourself an awesome base, you've made yourself something you're really proud of. Generally what you want to do with it is go and show people and be like, come and check out this cool thing I made. And so when games don't have multiplayer mentioned early on, it's normally a bit of a concern in this respect because you know what it's like when a developer says, oh, we'll add it later. We'll add it later into early access and yeah, with a stretch goal. And you just know that because the game wasn't designed for it from the ground up, it's going to be horrible if it ever happens at all. And I do mean if it ever happens at all. So often it's just, nah, that never happened. In this case, and it might be a bit of a fault when it comes to the single player approach, the game was actually designed originally as an MMO, which means the engine itself is built from a multiplayer perspective first, and the single player's almost been added later. What this does mean, and while they weren't willing to commit to this idea that yeah, there'll be a multiplayer, and there definitely won't be multiplayer in the early access release in September, there's very little reason, in my mind at least, why they wouldn't add it later down the line if the game's successful. The game seems to intrinsically support it, so why on earth not as a co-op experience? This would sound so much cooler, potentially cooperating with someone who happened to just have a base near you, for example, or just straight up getting together with friends to work on one. And while I can't say anything concrete, of course, we certainly say I had a very enjoyable chat with one of the developers at this event, all along the lines of what the possibilities would be for cooperative multiplayer and some of the things you could get up to. So fingers crossed on that one. And fingers crossed in general, really. I'm always up for a new sort of survival construction game. That's the sort of thing I'm 100% down for. I will admit to being a little concerned about this one so far. I haven't seen enough to make any judgment. I'm sure you guys are the same. but there's a little bit of that element of press F gameplay. That whole idea that everything you're doing is essentially done by interacting with an object, by, for example, just pressing F. And all that changes really is the location where you are and the objects you're interacting with. And for me at least, that is not a particularly fun gameplay arc. That's not something that really drags me in, because I quite quickly, my brain sort of kind of clicks onto this and goes, you're just doing the same thing over and over for a bigger next one. So hopefully they can find some way of making sure that that isn't how this sort of develops. It becomes more fleshed out than some of the... There's been some Mars simulation games of recent that pretty much criminal of the press F gameplay. So I hope this one goes a bit beyond that. What do you guys think? Is this just a bit of a weird one with the JCB connection, or is it actually kind of interesting because of it? Certainly, I'm intrigued to hear if any of you guys are like simulation fans. They've mentioned there's going to be manual control for all of these vehicles in the game, so you can go proper simulation nuts on it if you want. You know, Farming Simulator and Euro Truck Simulator are massively popular. Is this the sort of thing that could maybe... Are we JCB Mars Simulator? Let me know, guys. What do you think of this title? I figured it was interesting enough to give you my thoughts and show you a bit about the game. I'm certainly going to keep an eye out, see where it develops. Could be kind of cool if it goes the sort of right directions, I think. If you did enjoy this video, guys, please hit that like button. It does really help me in the channel out. If you didn't enjoy it, just next door to that is that dislike button. Hammer away on it. It only works once, but by all means, get that rage out. Get it out there. If you're new to the channel, please consider hitting subscribe for more gaming news, upcoming game info, what else we'll do, airsoft, let's plays, streams, all that good stuff. And otherwise, thank you all for watching. I will catch you for the next one.